Perfect. So thank you everyone so much for coming to our last workshop of McMedHacks 2021. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, and also Dr. Ibrahim Chamseddine, our instructor, here today as well. So we'll go through some key points as usual. Yeah, go ahead, Luca.
Absolutely. So as always, you'll find the assignment for the workshop we're about to see in the shared Google Drive folder. That's also where we'll put the Google Colab, and all of that is going to get uploaded either later tonight or tomorrow morning. You'll also find all of the previous assignments and solutions in that Google Drive folder, and we send that link out to you several times a week, so you all should have it by now. There will be, I think we'll do one tutorial this week, most likely on Friday. If you have questions about this workshop or about the assignments, please come and ask them there. And then probably our most important announcement, which we have more slides for as well, is the hackathon, which is coming up very, very soon, August 6th through 8th. And we highly encourage all of you to sign up for that. Even if you've never done a hackathon before, even if you've never really coded before, these sort of hackathons are a great opportunity for you to learn. We're absolutely making it beginner friendly, and there are awards to be won for everyone, even if it's your very first time coding. And there will be workshops and mentors there to help you if you do require help. So if you've had some sort of crazy idea for a medical image analysis project, do come check out that hackathon. Yeah, and if you know anyone that might be interested, it's open to everyone. It's absolutely free. So make sure you apply while there are spots and share the application with your friends if you want to sign up together. And we will also be sending out feedback forms about the workshops and presentations soon. This is the very first rendition of McMedHacks. A lot of the things were made up as we went along. And we'd love to know what we can do better in the future, because we will be making this an annual workshop series. So please fill those out when we send them to you, and you'll receive an email about that shortly. And then I think in terms of the Gather Town, we might be available for a little bit if you want to chat afterwards, after the workshop is over.
Yeah, so I just want to stress again about the feedback form. We'll send it out later. It'll be especially important to us this year, because this is the first time that we're hosting this. I know that there is a lot of working professionals in this audience, so we'd love to hear about what you've seen from other conferences or workshops that you've been to that you liked but we didn't have, or what did you liked about our program that others didn't have. So basically helping us to do our jobs better in the years to come. Yeah, so here's the ad for our hackathon again. It is going to happen next weekend, starting from Friday to Sunday, August 6th to August 8th. And the Google form the Google form to apply is shown on the screen as well, and we've sent out the information about it as well. I believe we've talked at length about this last time. So if you don't have time to do this yourself, you can forward this to your colleagues and students and so on. It'll be a fun time, and you're gonna also see some very familiar faces, including us, but other people who used to be our speakers. They are returning as judges, so it'll be fun. And yeah, it'll be a great time coding.
Yeah, a word about the prizes. As we've said before, we want to make sure that as long as you have some sort of idea for a medical image analysis project, there will be a prize that fits that category. So there are several. We're not going to disclose them all to keep the suspense high and give everyone a fair chance when we do reveal all of them. But we do have a grand challenge and a unique data set from our sponsor Alpha Tau for a real world medical image analysis challenge that they're encountering. And so you're going to have an opportunity to tackle that problem or any other problem you may have in one of our and submit under one of our general categories, which are for example, the most innovative solution to a problem in medical image analysis, or a prize for people who may be coding for the first time or might just be beginners. We have a Rising Star Award. There's several awards to be won, and we hope that all of you sign up for the hackathon and try for at least one of these.
Yeah, and I don't mean to give away too much about the Alpha Tau challenge, but they are curating that data set just for us. And it is a real world problem that their company is experiencing in real life. So if you feel like you didn't really have a chance to do our homeworks during the 8 weeks, that weekend could be your condensed opportunity to do it as well. And we are going to have those opt-in categories where you can choose to, I want to solve this problem using this data set. You can sort of define your problem yourself using the data set that we give, and you're going to be able to actually use a lot of the code that we have provided to you during the past 8 weeks. So we highly recommend all of you to apply, and you're our first priority, so you're going to get accepted. We don't say that to everyone else.
Yeah, we really want to see our McMed Hacks workshop series and presentation series participants. We want to see if you have actually learned the necessary skills to apply them to problems. So right now, 80% of the participants aren't from our workshop series, which is a pity. We'd love to see more of you signing up for the hackathon as well. Do make use of the opportunity. The majority of the applicants are undergraduates. So no matter what your level of education is or your level of expertise, please do sign up.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, and then we used the same slide last time, but the closing ceremony is happening this Saturday. This will be our last event of McMed Hacks 2021 before the hackathon, and we'll have 4 great speakers. Mohammed is going to talk about conditional GAN, CGAN, and then Ken is going to talk about distributed learning, and then Isam Largi is going to talk about a weekly supervised consistency-based learning method for a COVID data set. And then our dear Dr. Isan Al-Naka is going to talk about some really futuristic quantum enhanced machine learning and healthcare presentation. So it's going to be really exciting, and exceptionally this time, we're going to make our closing ceremony open to all. Not only the registered participants can attend, if you have friends and colleagues that you think might be interested in our program, next year they can attend as well for our closing ceremony. So we're going to make the Zoom link available to all. Please help us spread the word, and we'd love to see you. And if you know someone who registered too late, was late to registration and weren't able to follow our program this year, they're welcome to come as well. Just let them know. Yeah.
Okay. So with all those announcements out of the way, let's open up the actual content of week 7. We're very, very excited to have Dr. Chamseddine here today. We've seen him at many of the previous events as a participant, and with some very, very good comments and questions in there as well. So we're very excited to have him as an instructor today. But before that starts, we just want to acknowledge the land on which we're meeting. This is a virtual event, but it's still important to us to recognize that the institution that this event is hosted through is McGill University, which is located on the on the territory of the Ganagahaga. And if you don't know whose land you're on, you can go to nativeland.ca to find out. very useful tool. We've mentioned it many times before, but it's important to us that you recognize that a lot of the lands on which you reside have long served as places of meeting and exchange um, amongst the native inhabitants of the lands. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of very dark history that should be acknowledged when thinking about where these events take place and where you're coming from, even when it's virtual. So we just want to recognize and respect that in all of our events. And please do contact us if you have questions about this.
Perfect. And rules for participants, as usual, everyone has done a fantastic job to keep this a learning and collaborative fun space on Discord as well as here. We do want to maintain all of the connections even after this year's McMahon has finished. So please feel free to keep the working space on Discord alive, and we might think of other ways to keep everyone connected as well. More information about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As always, we have two wonderful mentors today. Malena and Aswar, if you want to unmute and say hello.
Yeah, hello. I hope you can hear me. My connection was a little bit unstable, but I'm Malena. I'm going into my 4th year of cognitive science, and I specialize in computer science.
Hi everyone, I'm Azwar, and I'm going into U3. Basically my 4th year at McGill, and I'm majoring in economics and computer science.
All right. So as always, our two wonderful mentors are here to answer your questions on the Zoom. No, not on the Zoom, on the Discord. I'm sorry. And let me pull that up here. Yujing, would you like to explain how that works?
Yeah, so is our bot on today?
Yes, or it will be shortly.
Perfect. And yeah, so essentially when the bot is on, you're going to type, there we go. You're going to click on the bot, not the chat, but click on the bot on the right. Yeah, or here, and then type in exclamation mark question space, and then your question. Then your question is going to be asked anonymously here.
Yes, but you may also ask them correctly. This is a feature if you would like to ask anonymous questions. Oop, did that go into the week 6? I'll fix it. But if it appears in week 6, that's okay too.
That's fine.
There's also another feature that we want to advertise today. If you put in attendance followed by your email address, your Zoom email address, the bot should tell you how many times you've attended and whether you're on course to get the certificate of completion. This is not yet accounting for recordings. So if you've watched the recordings and you don't yet have the credit for that when you ask the bot, don't panic. We'll implement that feature for our closing ceremony. So at the closing ceremony, you'll also be able to see that, and make sure you put the exclamation mark in front of the attendance. Okay.
Yeah, and then again, you're typing that to the bot, not to the chat.
Yes. Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Finally.
Sorry, it took us a lot of time to get those things out of the way. Great. So let's introduce our friend Ibrahim. We're very excited to have him here today. So Dr. Ibrahim Chamseddine is going to talk about multimodal image analysis and treatment outcome prediction. He is currently a postdoc fellow at the Harvard Medical School and at the Department of Radiation Oncology of Massachusetts General Hospital. He received his PhD in mechanical engineering from McGill University in 2019, after which he was a postdoc researcher in the Department of Mathematical Oncology at the Moffitt Cancer Center. His research focuses on cancer treatment outcome prediction, optimization, and personalization. And thank you so much for coming today and being involved with us for the past 8 weeks and being a great supporter for us. Thank you so much, and I'll leave the floor open to you, and you may start your workshop.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and thank you for the great organization. I'll start by sharing my screen. can you see the notebook, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, today, as you said, we will be talking about multimodality and outcome prediction. First, the majority of the talk will focus on outcome prediction because most of the methods that I'll be talking about extends to multimodality, and which I'll be cover at the end how this can be integrated. So first of all, what is outcome prediction? In cancer treatments, patients receive different types of treatments or combination of them, and we want to know whether the patient will respond to the treatment or not. So it's an estimate of the occurrence or the probability of occurrence of a clinical endpoint. I'll talk a little bit more about the clinical endpoints later on. These endpoints in general either are toxicity endpoints or survival endpoints or recurrence endpoints. When we talk about toxicity endpoints, there are different methods that are currently used. So for example, in radiotherapy, planners rely on dose volume histograms. And what is dose volume histograms? I just put something here to look at it. Maybe people know it, maybe other doesn't know what it is. So essentially, in radiotherapy, the planner has to take into consideration the presence of organs at risk, and they measure what percentage of the organ receive what percentage of the dose, and they got these curves, and they define a point at the curve such that they don't want the dose to exceed that percentage of the volume. And this is how toxicity is estimated currently in the traditional radiotherapy planning systems. However, this method has been implemented in the clinic. However, it ignores very important feature, which is the interpatient variabilities. So if you get two patients, if they have the same tumor, they will receive the exact same treatment regimen. However, the response to the treatment will be different. Here where data science can kick in, and here where methods like artificial intelligence and machine learning can integrate patient-specific characteristics into the outcome prediction, which will enable at the end personalized medicine. So how this can happen? First of all, it can help stratify patients into risky groups. So if you have a good model and a new patient arrive at the clinic, taking into consideration their medical history, tumor characteristic, etc., and the standard of care, we can say, yeah, this patient has high risk of mortality or risk of mortality, and then leave the decision to the treating physician. It can also allow treatment selection or modification. So sometimes if a patient will have high chance of local recurrence, maybe the doctor will decide to increase the dose of the treatment. Or if they have high chance of non-local recurrence, which is recurring the tumor outside its primary site, then maybe combination therapy or combination of local therapy like radiotherapy and immunotherapy, which is systemic, could be the option. And the third and very important reason for doing outcome prediction is clinical trial enrichment. And what we mean by enrichment of clinical trials is to select patients to each arm in the clinical trials such that you get the most benefit. So patients, for example, at risk of the treatment or risk of toxicity, it doesn't make sense to put them in, for example, dose escalation clinical trial, because these patients will most probably have an organ failure after all. And this is a paper that I put here. Oh, we can open it, it's free. This is a recommended reading. I just want to go through one of the figures because it in general tells about like the role of AI in clinical trial design, and here where it comes clinical trial enrichment, and this is a general overview of how AI in general can support clinical trial design. I've seen one paper or one model that's been used for clinical trial enrichment in Netherlands, I believe, where the model can assess if a patient will have the same response to proton therapy versus photon therapy, And then if they do, then they go right away to photon therapy because there won't be needed. There will not be a need for proton therapy, which is more expensive. So what are the form of outcome prediction? General supervised machine learning. There is the classification, which predicts a categorical outcome. A lot of these outcomes are binary, like will we have a one year survival or not, for example. Sometimes it's regression, which includes probability of occurrence. We'll say, yeah, the probability of recurring within 5 years is that much percentage. And a very famous category is the survival analysis or time to event models. And these models are regression models, but for time. So it essentially predict time to event. You say, well, for this specific patient, based on their characteristic, we predict that they will live that much of time, or they will have recurrence-free survival of that much of time. Now, we do consider different types of data in order to make these predictions. The independent variables or the input data are normally clinical variables such as tumor characteristics and characteristics of the patient, their demography, their medical history. If the tumor is located in a vital organ, also the characteristics of the organ. The treatment variables, and these usually are only considered when the model is predictive. So there's other types of models, which is called prognostic model, where the treatment variables are ignored. But in predictive modeling, where you need to decide if this treatment will work for this specific patient, treatment variables could include the dose, the schedule, the protocol of the treatment. In radiotherapy, we talk about the fractionation, the symmetric indices, if people are familiar with that. And of course, very important variable that is considered in treatment comes from images, from medical images. CT scans, MRIs, I'll talk at the end, towards the end of the lecture, what is the difference, not the difference, each of these two is used, and very important, the 3D dose maps. And a lot of research has been done on 3D dose maps. Now, what would you like to predict? What are the outcomes or the clinical endpoints? A lot of these endpoints are the primary endpoints in clinical trials, like the overall survival, local control, and sometimes non-local control is very important. Why? Because in many cancer sites, a lot of the treatments are able to control the tumor. However, you get a secondary tumor somewhere else. And here where non-local control becomes very important. Toxicity endpoints, usually it varies by site. So for example, in lung cancer, we have pneumonitis. In liver cancer, we have radiation-induced liver disease. These two toxicity endpoints are correlated with mortality. Now, lymphopenia is emerging as a very important endpoint. Lymphopenia is essentially the depletion of lymphocytes in the blood. So the blood is exposed to the treatment, and the white blood cells or the immune cells are circulating. And when they receive chemotherapeutic agents or they receive radiation therapy, these lymphocytes depletes, which makes the efficiency of the immune system weak. And a lot of the ongoing clinical trials combines, for example, radiotherapy with immunotherapy. And the immunosuppressive effect of radiotherapy may impede the efficiency of immunotherapy. So lymphopenia is emerging as a very important endpoint. Now, when we look at the prediction model, usually we rely on medical records and medical data. And if you look into the medical data, there is a lot of data. And the question becomes, which of these variables or features are important to the outcome? A very traditional classical method is to use multivariate analysis or univariate analysis. And the way it's done is you conduct a statistical analysis. I'll give an overview shortly about what is statistical analysis. And the statistical analysis leaves you with a statistic. And based on this statistic, you can define a p-value. So the p-value is how much two groups are different, like briefly. The lower the p-value is, the more significant the difference is. So for example, I'm giving here a very small and simple example from a paper taken from this link, which I provided here, about an outcome, which is the quality of life, and what are the significance of each of the variables. So here we see the age is very significant because the p-value is 0.022. Now, usually people use a threshold to say, well, yeah, this is significant. A very famous threshold is 0.05. Statisticians will kill me if they hear that, because now the trend is we don't want to use a certain threshold because people will think 0.051 is not significant and 0.049 is significant, which is not true. But as a rule of thumb, 0.05 is an accepted threshold. However, if you look, for example, at the body mass index, it's slightly above 0.05 and is not as significant as age. So why do we need to do this? Because this will tell us what are the important variables to consider in the model. A lot of the papers do rely on this analysis and use these features in order to build the model, which I totally disagree with. So, because some features with high p-values, like for example, here we have blood pressure has 0.2, could have a confounding effect. What does it mean to have a confounding effect? That this feature, if combined with another feature, they will have a very significant predictability with respect to the outcome. So it means that one feature alone is not good or is not significant, but it's very much needed to empower other feature. And I always give the example of, if you want to grow a plant, you need water, and the water will grow the plant by itself. And you need the fertilizer, but if you put only fertilizer, it will not be able to grow the plant. However, if you put fertilizer with water, the combined effect is enhanced. So the confounding effect is very important to consider. Now, this is when we talk about like features that have one layer, something like age or BMI. But what will happen when we start talking about deep features? How can we study the significance of images, for example, with respect to the outcome? And there's a pretty new method. Maybe the development of the method is not that new, but the application of the method is new into the field, which is called voxel-based analysis, which can do similar things, but for deep features. So the idea of voxel-based analysis is to use statistical testing in order to identify critical regions in the organ. So here I will show the output, and then I will talk more about the details of voxel-based analysis. This is an example of a lung. So here we're taking two different views of the lung. And here we're plotting the p-value, but we're taking the minus log p, because the p is very small. So taking the log, it will be negative minus log. So the higher the value, the more significant the region is. And here we're showing that the lower left corner of the lung is a critical region that should not be irradiated because it was correlated more than anywhere else with lung damage, just to give an example. So what is voxel-based analysis? Assume we have a group of patients, and these patients, part of the patients will have an event, or they will have a positive outcome. This outcome could be death, it could be toxicity or recurrence. And the other part, they have negative outcome. And assume we divide our cohort of patients into these groups by outcome, by positive and negative outcome. And then we go to the dose map, to the 3-dimensional dose map, and we go voxel by voxel. And then we check if there's a difference between the dose distribution in each group. And we do that voxel-wise. Say we take one voxel, and say we look at the different patients. Say the blue are the patients who had negative outcome, and the red are the patients that have positive outcome. If these two patients have similar distribution, then that specific voxel is not important. And to do this, we need to define a null hypothesis. And this, we will call it H0. H0 is a hypothesis that say positive and negative patients have the same mean dose in that specific voxel. And all what we aim is to reject this null hypothesis. How this null hypothesis can be rejected? In two conditions. If these distributions are far away from each other, so essentially we need the medians to be significantly different, and the standard deviation of each of these voxels to be small, such that we reach something like the figure here on the side. And when we look at these tails that are shared between these two distributions, this is what defines a p-value. When we say p-value equal to 0.05, it means this shared region is only 5% of the overall distribution of each cohort. And this is what we aim for. And here we can confidently reject the null hypothesis, and then this specific voxel is significant. So how p-value is calculated? We have to use a statistical test, and there's plenty of statistical tests. Here I just put a link to show how to choose a statistical test. So it really depends on the type of study. Do you have two groups or do you have one group? So one of the studies could be, I will not go through the details here, but you can see it. But for example, if you have one group and you want to measure if the median is significantly different than 0, then you can use, for example, Wilcoxon test. Or if you have two groups and you know that the distribution is normal, then student t-test is good. And there is the Mann-Whitney rank sum test, etc. So the result of the test will be a statistic and a p-value. And then you go compare a p-value to alpha. Alpha is the significance level that we accept to rejecting the null hypothesis. 0.05 is just an example. So how do we do it? We take the dose maps of all the patients. This is a 4D structure, right? Because each patient has a 3-dimensional dose map, and then we get a 4D structure. And we know the outcome of the patient. We stratify them in each voxel, and then we conduct a statistical analysis test in each voxel, and we calculate the p-value, and that will be the significant map. So let us try to implement the voxel-based analysis. So first we load the data. It takes time, so I did that already. So let me show you how the data looks like. So the data is stored in a folder called data, and then the folder called data has CT scans for each of the patients. The data is retrieved from Cancer Imaging Archive. It's for head and neck cancer, and the outcome is death. I will show you what are the inputs that we're considering. Here we have the CT. I'll tell you in a while what this wrapped means. And we have the dose maps. It's also 3-dimensional. And we have the gross tumor volume, which we'll be using later on. We also have the clinical data, which includes the outcome and the clinical characteristics. Okay. So we also need to install simple ITK's library for processing the images. And of course, some libraries that are basic, which we get error for. Let's see. I believe you need to reinstall simple ITK. Maybe in the meanwhile, if anyone has any question, then I can take it. Okay, things are working. So I will extract the clinical data, and I will put them in a data frame. I will call it DFCLN. CLN refers to clinical. Let's see how it looks like. So this is an example of how the clinical data looks like. HN is head and neck. We have the gender. 2 refers to male, 1 is for female. We have the age, which is continuous variable, and we have the stage. and then I ignored everything else, and then I look at the death, if they had death or not. Here we're assuming that we don't have any missing data, so I'm not talking about data imputation that you see. But I'll be happy to answer any question related to data imputation. So a very good practice is to look at the statistics of the data. So if we plot the statistics, we see that the majority of the patients are males. The ages are like the median age is around 65, and we have a range from 40, say, to 90. The stage, most of the patients present in late stages. And here, when we look at the death, we have around 60%, 60 out of the 80 or 85 patients, they didn't die at the last follow-up. So the occurrence is in a very small subset of the patients. Now, this is called imbalanced data set. So training a neural network or training any machine learning model to predict death will be hard. And I will talk through through this workshop how to treat these complexities and how to deal with imbalanced data set. But just for the sake of simplicity, I went and I imposed more of these deaths just for demonstration, because I want to show how the voxel-based analysis works. So we'll go here, and I will import the modified version of my clinical data. And yes, I am cheating just for the sake of the workshop. And this is the disclaimer: please do not use anything from this lecture for any biological or clinical interpretation or practice. So we extracted the clinical variables, and now we're ready to extract the dosimetric features. So I'll tell you how the code works. And if someone is not familiar with Python, please stop me, and I'm happy to answer. We have 56 patients. I defined the dimensions: dim1, dim2, dim3. This is the depth, width, height. And here, because the CT scans and the images will take like the upper body all the way to the brain, and I want to focus on the brain and the head and neck area. So I want to cut to zoom in essentially to the important region. So I manually do that. Then I import the clinical variables. Everything called CLN is called clinical. And I want to focus on 3 features: the gender, the age, and the stage. And then I will read the patient ID, and then I will go through each patient and import the data. I'm importing the CTs, which is a 3-dimensional array for that specific patient. I will import the dose maps, also 3-dimensional. So this will become 4-dimensional because the 4th dimension is the number of the patients. And then I have the clinical variables, which is 1-dimensional of length 3. And then we have the gross tumor volume mask. This is a mask or a contour. This will locate to me where the tumor is located. And I have the outcome, I call it Y. This is a binary outcome, whether there was death or not. And then I loop over all the patients. I read the image, and then I cut the image based on the dimension that I defined, and then I store it. Okay. It's still extracting, almost done. We extracted all the patients now. And just for demonstration, I'm plotting some slices. I'm plotting some slices for these patients. So here, for example, we're seeing slice number 60, and for different patients, right? This is like the head, and here this like the sinus area. Now, of course, there will be a lot of voxels here. And to work with high number of voxels, the number, maybe it's necessary, but most of the time it's not. And it's classical to reduce the number of voxels. Now, the number of voxels, before reducing them, we have for each patient or each image, you have more than 3 million voxels. So I reduce them into 30% in each dimension, and that will leave us to 81,000 voxels. If you have time and the computational power, you can keep the original images, If not, or you can reduce them, for example, by 0.5 or 0.6. This will be the deterioration of the CTs. We still have some enhanced regions versus the other. And again, this is for demonstration. So let's go and conduct the statistical analysis. So we will import the spicy stat library, and we will be using Mann-Whitney test. I'll tell you why. The Mann-Whitney test is measured by something called the U statistic. And of course, you need from the U to compute the p-value. I'm gonna loop over each single voxel, and I will split my patients into two groups. Group 0, these are the group of patients who didn't receive, who has negative outcome, and group 1 are the group of patients who has positive outcome. Now, if I don't have people with positive outcome, then my p-value will be then this voxel will not be significant, and I will save my p-value to be equal to 1. Already I defined it as 1s here, so I don't need this line. Now, if I do have group 1, then I would use a very simple function. It will conduct the statistical test, and it will output the U statistic and the p-value. I care more about the p-value, and then I will do it for each single voxel. And now I need to look at these significant maps. So I run it and I see this. So the white is the significant voxels, and here I'm plotting the minus log p. To avoid confusion, actually, I want to make the black to be the significant region, okay? So the black regions are the significant regions. The white regions are the insignificant regions, because log of 1 is, no, actually, because as p goes down, minus log p goes up. Now, then you say, well, what this is the continuum of p-values. Then I need to define what are the significant values. And to do this, we set up a significance level. I'm using 0.05 because this is widely used in the literature. And then I reject any voxel with a value of p less than 0.05. And this will leave me with this significance map. So the black voxels are the significant voxels that, if irradiated, they will lead to death. Now, this looks noisy, right? And there's not a signal actually here. And here I want to talk about a very important topic in statistical significance, which is called multiple testing correction. Now, if you're only conducting one test, what we did is enough. But now what we are doing is that we're conducting as many voxels as we have as the number of tests. So we said 81,000 voxels. So we're conducting 81,000 statistical tests. And that will be the total number of tests that we conduct. Now, if the null hypothesis is true and there is no significance, that will be the number of tests that we will call M0. If we can reject the null hypothesis, that will be the grounded truth that we don't know. Whether we know it or not, that will be M0. If we reject the null hypothesis, that will be M1. And the challenge is, how much of M0 can we capture? Ideally, we would like U, which is declared non-significant, to be equal to M0 and V equal to 0. If that is the case, then we have the true positive rate, the true negative rate to be equal to 1. On the other hand, we would like S to be equal to M1 and T to be equal to 0. So we have a true positive rate of 100%. So ideally, when we look at this matrix, what we would like to do is that we don't make any mistake in any of the voxels. And we want to maximize the diagonal values and minimize the off-diagonal values. But when we conduct 81,000 statistical analysis, the probability of having zero significant result is is correlated to the significance level. And essentially, the more you conduct statistical tests, test, the more the chance of having of rejecting a null hypothesis just by chance increases. And how much it increases, it's correlated to alpha. So the probability of having at least one significant result equal to 1 minus the probability of having no result, which is equal to 1 minus 1 minus alpha to the power m. So if we're talking about alpha equal to 0.05, our m is 81,000. But assume we only have 100 voxels. This means that our chance of getting a false positive, which is also called type 1 error, is more than 99%. So imagine our probability of having a false positive using our image. It's 100%. This problem is called multiple comparisons problem. And the error that arises from this is called the family-wise error rate. Now, we need methods to correct for this error rate. There are plenty of methods. And they're all based off adjusting the significance level, not using any more alpha equal to 0.05. Remember when you used alpha equal to 0.05, you had most of the voxels were significant. So there are many corrections to do that, and if maybe the oldest one was the Bonferroni correction, which it says, okay, if you're accepting 5% error, then you have to divide that by the total number of tests that you conduct. In our case, dividing alpha by 81,000. Imagine how sick this will become. There's a SIDAC correction. My personal preference goes to Benjamin Hochberg. If there's time at the end, I will talk more why, but I put some information here. There's also the permutation test, which is expensive, but very, very reliable test. These two tests are less strict than the Bonferroni and the SIDAC, but are more complicated. And I put here some recommendation and some further readings. I will implement the Bonferroni correction because it's the simplest. All of them are simple, but this is the fastest. We're just dividing alpha by m, and look at the result. We got 0 hits. None of the voxels were significant. So all these voxels that we saw before were false positives, essentially, according to Bonferroni. Now, if you conduct the Benjamin Hochberg or the permutation, you may get some signals. And this is for the voxel-based analysis. And this will take me to the outcome modeling. But before I do that, this. If anyone has any question, I'm happy to take it now on voxel-based analysis. Okay, should I proceed? Okay. Outcome modeling. Again, our objective here is to use images like CT scans that give us information about the patient internal structure, organs, and the tumor. Dose maps, which is the prescribed dosimetry for that specific patients, and to combine that with patient-specific characteristics in order to predict the outcome. This is taken from a paper by Ibrahim et al. In 2019, and this is a very good model that predicts outcome after radiation therapy. The way they do it is that they use the dose maps and they combine it with treatment features. They process the dose maps in a convolution neural network, something that was similar to the previous workshops. And they use the clinical variables like the demographic variables like age and gender, this is for liver cancers. So they use the liver function metrics and other treatment features, and they put it in fully connected path. And this fully connected path will extract clinical features. The symmetric path on the top using convolution neural network will extract the symmetric features. These two features will be combined, and then a prediction is made. We will try to combine something similar, but before I do that, you remember I reduced before my image into 0.3. I'm going to reduce it here into 0.2 because in the prediction, it will become more expensive. So I'm reducing it by 0.2 in each in each dimension. So the new number of voxels will be even smaller than before. So now I have 24,000 voxels. Let's look how this will look like. We will definitely be losing predictive power, but gaining some time, which is important now. And I will I will use PyTorch in order to build my CNN. I'm importing some libraries here, and I will start constructing my network. So my network will be composed of a convolution layer similar to Ibrahimov paper, but I will use only one convolution layer. But I will fuse the dose maps with CT scans. So my convolution layer will have two channels. One channel is for the dose map and the other for the CT scan. Let me actually run it and yeah. Yeah, so my convolution layer will have two channels. One channel will process the dose map and the other is the CT scans. They will be fused in the convolution layer. Batch normalization will follow the convolution layer, which is very important for to prevent overfitting. Then I'm using an activation function. I'm max pooling after that. The output will be also a three-dimensional structure, and then I flatten, and that will happen separately. Then I will start adding the clinical variables. I will take the clinical variables, I will normalize them, I will use activation, and then I will use a fully connected layer in order to reduce, no, I will use fully connected layer in order to, so after normalizing the clinical variables, they are ready to be concatenated with the dosimetric path. But before I do that, based on how much I'm pooling, I may have a large number of dosimetric features that could dominate the clinical variables. So I will put the dosimetric path into fully connected layer to reduce its size to something comparable to the clinical path. Then I will concatenate. I will do fully connected layer of the concatenated layer, normalize, activate, fully connected to make the prediction, and activation function at the end. This is the structure of the network. And I'm using here some functions to define what will be the size of the output of the convolution layer. This is pretty standard. If you want me, I can go in details how I build the network, or maybe what do you think, Eugene? Should I go into the details of building the CNN?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. How much do we have left after this? Yeah.
Maybe. I think we're doing.
Okay, then yeah, I think it's good to go into the network.
Okay, so first I define my convolution layer. My input channels. I have two input channels, an N, one for the CT scans, the other for the dose maps. I want to fuse them, so the output channel will be one. The kernel size is, I defined it as 10 here, just arbitrarily. I talk more later how to tune this. And then we have the pooling. I have the pool size. I put it here 5 also. Then there's the flattening. And then I have the fully connected layer. I need to define the dimensions. So the input will be the dimension of the image. And then I have the kernel size. I don't have padding. And then the stride is 1. And I use this function to compute the output of the convolution layer. And then I use this function to compute the output size of the max pooling layer. And that will be the output of the convolution path. I do it into the 3 dimensions. And then I use O means output, O1 times O2 times O3. That will be the size of the fully connected layer at the end of the convolution layer. And clinical is the number of clinical variables. And then I use batch normalization. Here I'm expanding the clinical features after concatenation. just to allow the clinical features to interact with the dysmetric path, and then the making predictions. The output will be equal to 1. Here I'm building the network, so we have the concatenation layer, the max pooling, etc. Yeah. And then this is the structure of the model after all. Data splitting and pre-processing. This is also something that was covered before. I split my data into 2 groups. The training group, I took 70% of the patient. I took their indices, and then I defined the X, the symmetric train, as the symmetric test, as CT's train, as CT's test, as clinical train, as clinical test, and Y train, Y test. And after that, it's very important to normalize. I normalize the clinical variables. And the way I don't like to normalize between 0 and 1, because I think we may lose information in that. I do standardization where I remove the mean of the population only on the clinical. So the mean is only calculated for the clinical, because you don't want to share any data between the clinical and between the train and the test sets. So I calculate the mean of the of the train set. I calculate the standard deviation of the train set, and I remove the mean from the whole population, and then I divide by the standard deviation. Convert the tensors, and then put them in data loaders to be used later on. And then the training starts. Now, all right. Okay. So I'm using 100 epochs. I define the training rate. I'm using Adam as optimizer. And this is, you don't need to do, but this scheduler, I just thought it's cool and maybe very important, maybe important if your model is not training. So what this scheduler will do is it will adapt the learning rate when you reach a plateau. So as your training is going slower and slower, it will reduce the learning rate to allow to train more and more. So I will go into each epoch. I will set the model to the training mode, and then I will compute the loss function. I'm using here, because it's binary outcome, I'm using binary cross entropy. Initialize the optimizer gradients, and then make the prediction on the training set. Remember, the models take 3 inputs, the CTs, the dosimetric, and the clinical input. Let me go up and show it to you here. Here it is. And then after that, we compute the loss, we back propagate the loss, and then we update. And we do this in batches. After that, we do the model, we set the model into the validation mode, and then we expose it to the test set, the same method, and then we compute the training and the validation loss. And here we see actually the model worked well. There's no overfitting, and both training and validation scores are reducing nicely without overfitting. Now it comes to the validation. Now I want to talk a little bit here about validation. I think this paper is very important. It introduces something called the tripod. Tripod is transparent reporting of multivariable prediction model for individual prognosis or diagnosis. And the tripod, it becomes a criteria for predictive models, very similar to clinical trials, where you have clinical trial phase 1, 2, 3, 4. This tripod statement classifies models into type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. And the higher the type, the more rigorous the model is. So type 1 is developing the prediction model where the predictive performance is directly evaluated on the same data. Something similar to what we're doing now. Now, you may split the data in cross-validation or bootstrapping. That will be type 1b. Type 2 is you divide your data before developing the model. You save one of the data for later validation. If you divide them in random fashion, it's type 2a. If you divide them in non-random fashion to preserve distribution between the patients, which is very important, then you have type 2b. Type 3 is when you develop the model in one data set, say, for example, from McGill Medical Center and then MUHC, if I remember. Yes, right. And then you build the model, and then you send the model to Princess Margaret, and you tell them, "Hey, can you validate my model?" That will be type 3. Type 4 is you have a model, you developed it, you built it, and then you publish it, and then it's publicly available to everyone. And then after that, you go and then you expose it to independent validation, and that will be like the highest type. Now, definitely when we look at predictive modeling, similar to machine learning, there's some metrics that can tell us how good these models are. Like the various classical, the receiver operating characteristic curve, or the ROC curve, which plots the trade-off between false positive rate and true positive rate. And this is a threshold-free type of measurement. So we don't need to specify if we get a score above which value we deem the prediction to be positive or negative, because that's a moving threshold. And we use the area under the curve of this ROC, under the area of the ROC curve to measure how good the model is. In perfect prediction, we have AUC equal to 1. When AUC equal to 0.5, then the prediction is just as equal to any chance. So let us plot the ROC curve of our model, and we have 0.7. 0.7 is good. But before we look into this, sometimes you may have an AUC of of a good AUC, but this doesn't mean that the model is good, because sometimes the AUC is just because you have high true positive rate and low true negative rate, or vice versa. And sometimes, and this could happen when you have imbalanced data set. If you want, for example, if you have an outcome that only happens in 10% of the patient, here you need a model that has a high ability of detection of the positive outcome. And this may lead to a problem. So a good way to look at after the ROC curve is the confusion matrix. So the confusion matrix is 4 entries. You have the true positive, true negative, false negative, false positive, and you aim to maximize the diagonal and minimize the off diagonal entries. But here you have to specify a threshold for the prediction. So here, for example, let's plot our prediction matrix. So here you see, although we got high AUC, our confusion matrix is bad, because we do have true positive rate, but the true negative is low. So we have our probability of false alarm is high, and the true negative actually is the true positive. Sorry, the false positive is high as well. This is based on threshold equal to 0.5. You may say, well, I want to put a threshold equal to 0.2, and then you got the opposite. Well, actually, this is better than before, because you get the diagonal is higher than everyone else, right? And then when you have data imbalance, it's very important to look at the precision recall curve, because normally the ROC curves are very optimistic. And the precision recall curve will tell you more, will give you more information. So in the precision recall curve, we're plotting the precision versus recall, and here also this is measured by different metrics like the F1 score, for example, or the area under the curve. And contrary to the ROC curve, where you aim your curve to be approaching the upper left corner, because you want to minimize the false positive rate and maximize the true positive rate. Here you want to maximize both the precision and recall, and you want to aim for this curve to be at the upper right corner. So yeah, this is when it comes to images. Now, if you have good computational power, then you can do better than this, because what we are doing now is that we divided our data into 2 sets, one train and one test set, and then we conducted analysis. We train on one set, we validate on the other set, and we got a score. But this score could be very much biased because it could be very much sensitive to how we split our data. So if we, for example, do another random split of the data, we may get a total different score. And one way to treat this is to repeat the splits all over again and again, and take the average score. Of course, when we work with images, this will consume a lot of computational power. So people who has clusters or workstations, they can do it. Now, alternatively, you may compromise a little bit from the information that you have and go back to the DVH, but not look at the dysmetric indices, but look at the complete DVH. And instead of using the traditional method of setting up thresholds and constraints to the planning, is to use the DVH to predict the outcome. So here we're trying to use the dose volume histogram in a prediction model to assess the treatment. And what is the difference between this method and the old method is that the old method, it uses one data point on the DVH. Here we're considering all the interaction between the dose volume histograms to make prediction. What is a DVH? So we talked a little bit about it before, but more here we have two versions of the DVH. The differential DVH, which plots how much volume of each dose we're receiving. So here, like the tumor is receiving more volume of the high dose area, and the spinal cord, which is organ at risk, is receiving more volume of the low dose area. So this is a good plan. There is also the cumulative DVH, which is essentially the cumulative of this version, so of the differential DVH. Now, recent studies use differential DVH in order to process it in outcome prediction model. Yes, we will lose the spatial information versus, for example, 3D dose maps. We will be able to still capture interactions between the different regions, but we will lose the space. Sometimes differential DVH is enough. And if that's the case, then we can do way more in terms of cross-validation and in terms of tuning the model. So this paper was published recently. Actually, this paper by Isamu Nakka, who will be the presenter next week in week 8 at the closing ceremony. He developed this model, and he's using the differential DVH to predict 2 toxicity outcome after radiation therapy in lung cancer. Actually, this is the local control, and this is the toxicity outcome. And he will process the DVH. He used the 3 convolution layers, average pooling after each layer. And look here, it's one dimensional, because yeah, the DVH is 1-dimensional array. It's not 3D anymore. And then he merged here the clinical input. Now he didn't use a clinical path by the mean, but he used more dissymmetric indices to empower the DVH. And then he used fully connected layer, and he made the prediction. Let's try to implement something similar, but we have to be careful here to remove the dose that is provided to the tumor itself, because if we're trying, for example, to predict for 2 reasons. The first reason, if we're predicting toxicity, then the dose delivered to the tumor is not that important. The second reason is, no matter what, the tumor dose is decided by the planner or the treating physician. So it's not something that we can change most of the time. So the focus will be at the dose outside the tumor. So here where we use the contours or the mask. So let me show you one of the contours. So this is one of the patients, and I'm using the XGTV that I extracted earlier, and this will be their tumor mask. So I'm gonna remove the tumor mask and from the dose map. I'm doing it here. And then I'm dividing the DVH into histograms to bins. I'm defining the width of the bin to be 1 gray. And then I'm normalizing the DVH such that the area under the DVH equal to 1. And then I got the DVH. So let's see an example here. Here, this is an example of one DVH. You see a lot of the, there's a spike at the low intensity region. This means it's a good plan because you really want this to be around the tumor, the high values. Sometimes you have spikes, high spikes around 0. So in proton therapy, for example, where the dose is confined around the tumor, you get high dose and then you lose the signal. A good practice is to mask that out and combine dosimetric indices like mean dose. We will define the network as we did before. The difference here is that instead of defining the kernel size and the pool size, I will leave this variable for now. I will feed it in later on because I want to tune that. And then, as I said before, it's good practice to, instead of doing one split, so the first row is that what we did before, is to do it again and again and get different scores. So we will cross-validate. So the training code that we did before, I put it inside a function that takes the train loader, the model itself, the loss function, and the optimizer. And this module will train the model. And then I will do this again and again. So I will split the data into groups. I have 4 groups here. I will use the white group to train the data, the gray to validate, and then I get an AUC 0, AC 1, 2, and 3. And then I want some measurement or estimate of the AUC, median or mean, and some measurement of the variability. Standard deviation, I don't like it. Usually I like the 95% confidence interval, especially if you have large number of resampling, or the interquartile range. And then we will do that. So let's cross-validate. And then here we'll see the first cross-validation. You have AUC equal to 1. Second cross-validation equal to 0.8. The third is 0.5. The fourth 0.86. You see there's high variability. Let's plot the ROC curve. I promise you that I like more the 95% confidence interval. This is what I'm using. You see it's all over the place. So what we were seeing before was a little bit optimistic. And this is called model instability. Is this a reliable model? Definitely not. Why? Because in one split, it performs just perfect, and another split, it performs just like a random guess. I will come more later how to treat this model instability problem. But just to say something here, the mean AUC has a jump at the beginning. This is very important. This tells you that you have a sharp increase in the true positive rate as 0 compromise of the false positive rate, which is very good. Now, when I go to network optimization, because we're using DVH, the model training is not expensive, so we afford to do network optimization, and there's plenty of methods to do that. Assume I put the whole training cross-validation that I did before into one function, and I call this function hyperparameter score, and I feed one candidate of the hyperparameters, and then I do the cross-validation. Everything that I did throughout the whole workshop is in this box. This is the mean AUC. So I'm evaluating the different hyperparameters. Then I have the hyperparameter space, and then either more rigorously is to use optimization, or you can just sample this parameter space. Here I'm using grid search. You can use random search. A better method is to use a Latin hypercube, for example. And good practice is to evaluate the same data point more than once, because there's randomness and uncertainty. We're not doing this here. So I'm defining this function that takes the hyperparameters and compute this cell. And the output will be the mean AUC. define it here, and then I will, like, this is everything that we have before. The output will be the mean of the AUC. Then I will sample my space for the hyperparameters. So here I'm defining my hyperparameters. For example, the kernel size, I want them to be between 1 and 10. The max pooling size between 1 and 10. The learning rate between 10 to the power minus 4 and 1. And then I ask my sampler to select data points in this range. I'm just installing something here. It's done. And then I start resampling, and you see it here. One hyperparameter, I have kernel size equal to 1, pool size equal to 1, learning rate equal to 0.001. It do fourfold cross validation as before, and the mean AUC is 0.7. The second hyperparameter is 111. The mean AUC is 0.6. Then we have 110, 0.01, 0.62, and it continues. I did this 10 times, and the output will be the best network. So the best network for our application was a kernel size of 5, polling size, so there is no polling because the polling size is equal to 1. And then the AUC was 0.84, which is high. Now, I still have around 10 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about some refinements and consideration. I mentioned before the data imbalance, where we have a minority and majority group in the data. Always look at the precision recall curve, because the ROC curve will be optimistic. There are methods to deal with data imbalance. You may undersample the majority group or oversample the minority group. This is my least favorite. Why? Because it's very easy to leak data from the train to the test data set. A better, in my opinion, is to use a custom loss function. So, for example, and what we used before is the binary cross entropy loss function, which is essentially just, if it's positive, it takes the log of the probability of being positive, or if it's negative, it takes the log of the probability of being negative. So this treats both the positive and the negative labels equally. If you know a priori that 20% of the patients will have positive, it's a good practice to give more weights to this term. So this could help in data imbalance, is to use custom loss functions. Model instability, this is something very similar to what we got before, where you have where the score of the model is sensitive to the split of the data, and yeah, there are different methods to stabilize the model. You need to stabilize the model before clinical practice. You cannot use a model that is unstable in clinical practice. One of the methods is to increase your sample size. You say, well, I don't have more data. Okay, I mean, that's a feasible reason. We don't always have more data. Another method is to use stronger regularization. Sometimes it helps, most of the time it doesn't. Or reduce the number of hyperparameters. If you're using CNN with 10 convolution layers, make them 3 and try. Or use model aggregation. Model aggregation, I think this is the best method. And model aggregation, I really hope this is, I have it open. I will talk briefly about it now, but maybe later on. Model aggregation, imagine the relation between random forest and decision tree. Decision tree is, a random forest is essentially a combination of decision trees where each of these decision trees are trained on a subset of the data, and then it gives a score, and then the random forest is the average of these scores. So you can do the same for convolution neural network, especially if you have DVH where you don't have, where the model is not expensive. So you can train, say, 3 or 4 convolution neural networks, and each of these neural networks is trained on subset of the training data set. And then when you use the validation data set, you get a prediction score. And then after the prediction score, you may go and say, I have 10 models, I need to aggregate them. Either you allow them to vote, or you take their average prediction. And this could help in stabilizing the model. I want to mention here something called pre-registration of study analysis plan. This is a good practice in predictive modeling. What is pre-registration? This is a practice taken from clinical trials. In clinical trials, people pre-register their clinical trial, their methods, their inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they made it available before the clinical trial starts. This to increase the transparency. Thor et al. Recommended doing the same thing, to publish the methods or developing the model prior to validating the model, and deposit it publicly and made it available to people. That this is the method that I'm going to use. So when you receive the external data set or the validation data set, you cannot essentially allow for leakage of the or biasing your model to the external data set. There are many repositories for doing this. Open Science Foundation is one of them. I did it for my study. This is my study analysis plan that I did way before I conducted the analysis of the model. So this is how it looks like. It has to include enough information. So here I published my methods, what I'm trying to study, what types of data I have, how I'm imputing the missing variables, my methods of imputation, what are the different models that I used, the different cross-validation. This is necessary cross-validation that I used to build my model, how I'm gonna handle feature selection, what are the endpoints, and what are the different survival models that I used. So it's good practice to do this in outcome prediction models. Last but not least, I promised you to comment on multimodality. Multimodality was mentioned before. When we talked about multi-channel input in convolution neural network, we used CT scans and we used those maps. You can also use MRI. You can use any sort of images. So provided that the images, all the images are pre-registered into by registration, I mean spatial normalization. They all have to have the same location of the tumor and the vital organs. And I forgot to mention at the very beginning, there is different tools to do this. What I used to register my dose maps and CT scans is something called Plastimatch. I provided here. It's a software. I believe it's developed in our lab. I'm sure it's developed in our lab, and you can install it and use it for registration. Yeah, to go back to the multimodality. So there's different types of imaging. There's the PET scan, the CT scan, the MRI. And the MRI, there's the T1, T1C, T2, and the FLAIR. And each of them emphasizes on different things. So for example, the MRI will give more details on the soft tissue and the ligaments. It's important to see the organ, the internal organs. If you need, but it's more expensive. It takes more time. A faster modality is the CT scan. The CT scan is very good to get like an overview of the tumor size, where the tumor is located. Sometimes you need to combine both of them. So, and similar to what we did before, you can fuse the CT and the MRI and two channels into the convolution neural network, and you allow them to learn. And this is a very good reference on how to do this. And thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really, really clear and very resourceful as well. You linked a lot of things that I can't wait to read myself. I have some questions for you, but I think I should let Amani ask her question first. Amani, would you like to ask your question? Or do you want me to read it? Or our mentors can read it as well. Yeah, that was really good. Amani, do you want to ask it yourself, or? Okay, I'll say it. So, what did she say? Oh, yes, please read it. All right. Okay. So can I use the DVH approach to predict a rectum dose for prostate cancer, or is it just for lung cancer?
It's not just for lung cancer. You can use it in any organ. I'm using it now for liver. Whether the DVH will be important or not really depends on the site and the interaction between the space. What I would say is it's worth trial. It's fast, and if you get good score, then it's good. it's not guaranteed that the DVH will be enough or it can replace the dose maps. But I mean, there's nothing that prevents from trying it because yeah, it's not only for lung. I'm implementing it now for liver.
Awesome, thank you. And if you don't mind actually sharing your notebook again, I have
Sure.
a specific question. When you were talking about fusing the clinical data branch and the dosimetric branch, I was wondering, you were talking about before the training block. Actually, I was wondering which part did you sort of which code, which line did you actually achieve the fusion of the two branches of the dosimetric?
Sure. So here, we have the inputs are the dosimetric and the CTs. These are the images. And then we have the clinical variables. So the CTs and the dosimetric those maps will be fused in the convolution layer, because the convolution layer, the input channel is equal to 2. Okay. And then after that, we flatten our network. And then after flattening, this will become one layer. This will become a layer of 1 dimension. And then our clinical variables are 1 dimension. So we also concatenate them here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And there is another lower down in your notebook. There was a DVH of the spike, and you said something about removing it. I didn't quite catch the entire thing there. If you don't mind reiterating.
Sure. So this DVH is most probably refers to photon therapy. If you look at proton therapy, where all the dose is concentrated around the tumor, you most probably get something. This will go at 0 up to 100 because all the area around the tumor receives almost no dose. And then you get some signal here that is really attenuated or really dominated by the spike at the very beginning. So in order to retrieve the signal here, you need to remove that spike to make the signal, to give weight to the signal. But if you remove this spike at the 0 dose, you're changing your mean dose and your maximum dose. So yes, you can remove it, but you have to include with the clinical variables something about the mean dose or EUD or something that represents the dose itself.
Okay. Thank you. And does anyone else have another question? Oh, I guess one more question. When you were talking about the tripod thing, and then I need to read it more in detail myself as well. Does this have anything to do with? I guess it was type 2A or 2B, where it's you're validating your model in another distribution. I started in another institution and things like that. Does have people employed things like federated learning and distributed learning on using this tripod statement or building on top of it or things like that?
Yeah, that was a discussion last week with in our group. I was part of the NSF NIH meeting for essentially defining research topics for the coming decade, and one of the big thing was availability of clinical data, and I haven't seen anything that was seriously implemented so far in sharing and building these methods between institutions, but I think this is something that's going to happen in the coming decade.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Actually, one of the talks by Dr. Ken Cheng in the closing ceremony, he'll talk about a distributed learning algorithm that he has developed during his PhD. So I look forward to hearing that. So yeah, that concluded my question. Does anyone else have any questions? You can raise your hand, or if not, we can want to thank Ibrahim again for your fantastic talk, and we're gonna talk about some of the outros that we normally do in these workshops. Maybe Luca, you want to share your screen?
All right.
Perfect.
All right,
Yes.
thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting talk.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the participants are expressing their gratitude as well.
Thank you.
I am sharing my screen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just going to wrap this up quickly by thanking our sponsors who are helping to make these events possible. TransMedTech McGill, Alpha Tau, the Medical Physics Unit at McGill and our own lab, and the Jewish General Hospital at the Lady Davis Institute, COMP, and GatherTown. And of course, our team who helps us to organize all of these events and find sponsors and find wonderful mentors such as the ones we had today. We want to thank Marisa, Sheen, Alana, Zachary, Hossein, Elena, Juan, and Milosh, and our supervisor, Dr. Enger, for all their help in putting these events together.
Yeah, and once again, our closing ceremony is on next Saturday, and it's going to be open to all. So you're welcome to invite your friends who might be interested in our program next year as well. Yeah, so I guess we'll go to GatherTown and stay a brief period of time, and then we'll go have dinner.
Yeah, all right. So we'll send the link to the GatherTown in the Zoom and in the Discord. And if you'd like to chat to us, we'll be around for a little bit. But it's getting late, at least in America, so we won't be around for too long. Thank you so much, Dr. Chamseddine. That was really, really wonderful workshop.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm glad that people like to attend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're one of our first invited instructors that we got, and you've been always really supportive to us as well. So we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Right.
Love to have you back next year.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
See you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. I'll stop recording.